Hey everyone, welcome. Today I am introducing you to Nico Becerra. I wanted to bring Nico on today because he is currently the president and CEO of his law firm, N. Becerra APC, out of San Diego, and he is licensed to practice in both California and Washington State. He also provides business consulting and business coaching through his consultancy, the Becerra Company. And Nico is not your typical lawyer. He comes from a big family of entrepreneurs and was a businessman himself before he went into law. And even before he identified as an entrepreneur, Nico was a professional surfer, Starbucks barista, salesman, and a model. So not the traditional path that most lawyers take. This makes Nico a great lawyer for the younger generation starting out their businesses because he's not, as he will say, your parents' lawyer. He doesn't show up all the time in a suit and tie. He's relatable, and it makes it easy to reach out to ask all your business needs. More and more millennials are identifying as entrepreneurs, so having a new age lawyer on your side is incredibly helpful. Nico has started various companies, consulted with and represented startups, influencers, entrepreneurs, and investors. So today, Nico and I are going to talk a little bit about hiring, legal structure, and when a business owner should bring in a lawyer. So hello, Nico, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Of course, thank you for being here. So you and I know each other because we both grew up in La Jolla, and it's a pretty small town, so everyone kind of knows each other. Yep. And we were all immersed in the beach and surf culture pretty much from day one. So, starting out in La Jolla and going into pro surfing for us in La Jolla is kind of typical, maybe not for everybody, but kind of a typical path that we know a lot of people take. But going from pro surfing then to law is not so conventional. So, how did you kind of make that leap, or why did you make that leap too?
So I appreciate you having me on, first of all, and I guess that leap seems unconventional, probably to most people, but I think the real kind of path there was because my dad is a lawyer and owned a law firm, and so my parents both being surfers, growing up in a surfing family, going that route after surfing, as an amateur in competitions and having the opportunity to become a pro surfer, even though it definitely was not in the elite level, but it was good enough that I got to travel and get paid to do it. So that was something that I couldn't pass up. So really it was kind of a break after high school that allowed me to really figure out what I wanted to do. And I think my dad, his influence as a lawyer and a business owner really drove me towards that legal route, towards that business route. And after a few years of surfing, I think I really just got bored. I feel terrible saying that because it was such an amazing experience, but it just wasn't stimulating enough for me from a mentally stimulating standpoint. And I wanted to get more out of my life in terms of my education and my business and my professional career. So, surfing and traveling and partying was fun, but it got boring eventually. And so my parents made me go to school while I was doing that. So I was studying business management and got a degree in business management as my undergraduate, and then started working for my dad as an operations manager. And the natural course was to go to law school and hopefully take over his firm once I graduated and passed the bar for, reasons that aren't really worth discussing on this podcast. The route to taking over his firm never really materialized. And so starting a business consulting business and then becoming a business attorney was kind of the natural progression of my education and my career. I had the benefit of running my dad's business with 130 people in it. So I saw the inner workings of everything from, a 2-person operation to a 130-person operation. And it just gave me so much knowledge to put into my approach to the law that kind of going from spending every day at the beach to sitting in an office running a business with 130 people really gave me that approach and that perspective of a lot of friends, as you said, growing up in this community who are like, okay, I want to start my own business. What do I need to do? And I got to experience that and see that transition from my life as a surfer to now an owner of multiple businesses. And I love to be able to share that with my clients and my friends and my colleagues to say, look, there's ways to do this and to be successful and to protect yourself. And so I got to experience it firsthand, and now I get to share it as part of something that I do every day, which is my passion anyway. So it's really fun for me.
Yeah, that's perfect. And then also starting off in businesses and seeing that side of things, and then going into law is super helpful, because then the businesses that you help, you're able to give kind of like that consulting of, yeah, I get it. I get this is how you want to do it. However, maybe this is the better way because this is what's legal, or, be able
For
to
sure.
guide people better.
Absolutely, because there is something that I've noticed, at least, and this isn't to disparage other lawyers, but most lawyers that took the conventional route to the law typically didn't maybe even work in any business before they became a lawyer. And then when they graduated law school and passed the bar, they'd either worked for law firms as, interns, or, having their experience be based as part of their law school education. And so they've never been a business owner. And so one of the things that sets me apart from most attorneys is that I sit in the shoes of the business owner. Whereas even my mentors have been lawyers at big firms for 25 years, they've never been a business owner. So although they might be business litigators and they're extremely good at what they do, they've never signed a paycheck, or they've never understood how to pay your rent and pay your employees and pay your bills and had those stresses. So when you're taking that perspective as a business owner, it changes the way you approach both your business and the law, because you might be willing to take more risk knowing that you're trying to build a business, not just make your boss happy.
Yeah, I can totally relate, because in architecture, it's the exact same thing. A lot of people go straight to architecture school, and then outside of school, they go work for a firm, where I kind of, did things a little backwards too and started early. And so by the time I was 27 and people were working for firms, I was a couple years into my business, and it creates a whole different kind of dynamic. So I can totally relate. So with that, we do talk a lot about architecture and design in this podcast. And one of the main reasons I wanted to bring you on is because a lot of architects and designers hire independent contractors for things like drafting, or really mainly drafting, but also sometimes interior design or just other work, because there are a lot of how you call solopreneurs who they're architects that don't want to take on a big firm basically. And so they hire these independent contractors. But in California, this last year, AB5 was passed, and this has created a little bit of I don't know if you want to call it hiccup, but something we need to be more aware of. And it seems like all the architects I talk to have no idea what it means, or what it really means for us. So I wanted to bring you on to, first of all, kind of just very briefly, if you can, just let us know, what is AB5? What does it really mean?
Sure. So I'm going to preface everything I'm about to say with the fact that I have no intention of what I'm going to say in the rest of this podcast to be legal advice. It's just general information, maybe a little bit of history and a little bit of practical information, but none of it advice. And I would recommend all of your listeners, whether they're in California or other states, that if they are looking to do something, that they find a lawyer that can give them that advice, because all of these things are very technical, and every individual situation needs to be reviewed, in my opinion, by a lawyer. So hopefully this will be information that can guide you to find your lawyer, as opposed to you relying on this information, which I'm not telling you to do. And frankly, if you do rely on this, you're making a mistake, because it's not legal advice. But you can rely on the truthfulness and the accuracy of it, just not as advice.
Yes.
So AB5, and to give a little bit of that history of independent contractors. So it's pretty funny for me as a lawyer who practices employment law and business law on a daily basis, to hear people saying, oh my gosh, the laws have changed, everything's different, AB5 is this crazy law. And when in reality, it's not. It's actually just codification of a case that happened in 2018 that kind of set the groundwork for what this law is. So independent contractors in California have always been regulated in some capacity, whether it's by the IRS or California state saying, hey, we want to make sure that if you're classified as an independent contractor, that you truly are independent of the person who's hiring you. And they looked at primarily just control. They wanted to see that the person who hires the contractor doesn't have so much control over that independent person that they should really be an employee. And the whole purpose of these laws is to protect people from being misclassified and then not getting the benefits and the rights that employees have. California and the United States as a whole is very big on protecting employee rights. And so when we look at how AB5 plays into this, it's basically just a legal, law in terms of the government saying this is now an actual law, not just cases, saying these are the specific steps that we're going to take to review whether someone you hire as a contractor is or is not an independent contractor by definition under this law. So AB5 is really just the government finally saying, okay, we're not going to rely on all these different rules and metrics. This is the official law. There's an ABC test that comes out of the Dynamex case, which is the case from 2018. And the ABC test it's too nuanced for me to try to even give you a brief explanation of it here. But again, it focuses on that independent nature of the relationship that primarily focuses on, does the person, in this case would be you as the business owner, have too much control over this independent contractor that means that that independent contractor should be an employee, and as a result of that needs to have all of the rights and protections that employees have. So, and I did a video about this that people can see on my website on thenewagelawyer.com that talks specifically about this issue for more information. But mainly AB5 is just the new law that really is getting a lot of attention because of the current economy with like app-based drivers. It's the Ubers, the Postmates, the DoorDashes. And that's why I think I say it's funny, because 5 years ago, this was still a really big problem for a lot of businesses. But now it's become so publicized by, the Ubers and the Lyfts of the world fighting this law in California, and it creating awareness for people saying, not only business owners saying, well, maybe I need to review whether or not these people are truly independent contractors, but it's also creating awareness for people who have been independent contractors who might be thinking, well, wait, I should be getting lunch breaks. I should be getting meal breaks, or rest breaks. I should be getting overtime. Those are the things that really most business owners should be concerned about. It's not just whether or not someone is classified as an independent contractor or not. It's, are you giving these people a job that should meet the other requirements of employees? And that's where my job comes in and saying, look, you've not only misclassified this person, so yes, they're not truly an independent contractor, but you're also violating all these other laws under the California Labor Code. That's where the real penalty is. It's not just misclassification. It's, are you also violating this person's rights as an employee that they could then come back and unfortunately sue you for, that can be very, very expensive. So, again, AB5 is just the law that is now saying officially, this is how we determine whether or not someone is an independent contractor or not. And then carving out all of the exemptions for who, even though the law would say they're independent, they should be classified as employees, we're going to carve them out as long as you follow these other rules. So there are exemptions, and frankly, architects fall under one of those exemptions. And so that's how they're trying to update it. They recently just added a whole new list of exemptions in September of this year. So the law is, it's changing constantly. Yeah. I mean, no laws are perfect. But you can see, and I know in our recent ballot, there's a proposition now trying to exempt app-based drivers. So it's still very much a complicated issue, but it's important for every business owner to know whether you're bringing in an assistant or you're bringing in somebody else to help you with your business. In California, especially, you want to make sure that you're not risking that misclassification, because the penalties and the damages can be substantial.
Yeah, and that's why I think it's so important that we do try to do it right. It's confusing even when you look at all the information and know about the exemptions and stuff. It's still so confusing, obviously, which is why you need to be a lawyer to really understand it. But but so licensed architects are exempt, and that's, I think, where it gets confusing too, because that means that my understanding is then you're only, so say you have a project and you need some help with it. You just need drafting work, and you're going to have someone who work remotely, have their own software, work at their own time. If they want to work at midnight, that's cool. You know, you're not in control of any of that. You're just saying, this is the project we're working on. This is what you need to do for the drawings. But if they're not a licensed architect, which 99% of the time they're not, usually our independent contractors are drafters or people in school or something, then that's where the discrepancy is. That, my understanding is that both entities would need to be licensed architect in order to fall under that exemption.
To fall under the architecture exemption, yes. As far as a drafter, I don't, I'd have to look in, again, this is why it's so important to know what state you're in and what laws cover that relationship. But frankly, if you're going to have somebody doing some part of the work that is your role as the architect, right? So in your scenario, there's two relationships and three entities or three individuals, right? You have the homeowner who's hiring you as an independent contractor, as an architect, and then you have your people or your support that's coming from an independent contractor. So in that situation, you have two contractual relationships, the homeowner with you, and then you with the contractor that's working for you. And the question comes under that level of control. So I think it's a really important thing to recognize the homeowner and your relationship, because under the law, that is the truest form of an independent contractor. The homeowner has no business designing plans and doing an architect's job, which is exactly the point of saying they are truly independent. So that is, by definition, the clearest example of what a true independent contractor is. So here's a licensed individual who may or may not have their own entity being hired by a customer who's basically saying, hey, I need you to do a job for me. Then you have this architect hiring someone to do drafting for them. The question under AB5 boils down to a lot of things, but one of it being, what are the levels of control that you as the architect have over this contractor? Is the work that contractor is doing part of the work you're doing for your client? And then are you going to be dictating the terms, the conditions, the price, the scope of work, the where they're doing the work, the how they're doing the work, what equipment they're using to do the work? Those are all the questions that boil down to say, well, is that person really independent of you? Or should they be treated as an employee? And so that's where you want to look at, is a drafter a licensed architect? And if they are, could this be a business to business transaction where you're just subcontracting some of the work? If not, if they're a student, like you said, and they're just going to do some work for you and you're paying them on an hourly basis, they may fall under an employee classification, and therefore you'll want to make sure that you classify them as such. And so it really just depends on the nature of the work. If you're an independent contractor architect doing work for a homeowner, and you know another independent architecture firm that can pick up some of your work because maybe you are a smaller shop and they have some extra time to do work to help you, that could be a strategic partnership. So that's not an independent contractor agreement at all. That would actually be business to business. So that wouldn't violate AB5, hypothetically. That would be a situation where one business, it'd be like me contacting another law firm saying, hey, I need some help with this case. Do you guys want to participate with me? So now we're two separate entities or individuals doing work together. They're not my employee. I've contracted with them on a business to business to help me with this one case or this one issue. So the difference there being that other firm is entirely independent in its own right, doing its own business, has its own clients, whereas the student is just picking up part-time work for you. That would feel more like an employee relationship than the other firm who is separate and apart from you has its own business. And that's more business to business. So that's where I was, the student probably, again, without looking at the details, seeing if they classify under the exemption, the student relationship, more likely than not going to be an employee relationship, unless they're doing this for a whole bunch of other people and they're like setting themselves out as like, I do drafting on the side and I have 20 clients and here's my price and here's what I do. It's a project basis. Again, it could fall under the exemption. It's just a matter of how it's structured.
Yeah. And I think that makes it really clear, is thinking even in terms of the owner hiring you and how, it's not like they could do it themselves or anything. There's like that clear distinction. Yeah. I feel like that helps, break it down in the mind better. So
Absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, I would say that like whenever I come across this, because it's unfortunately the law is very restrictive, and every client that I have is always looking for ways to make the independent contractor situation work, and that's not out of an act of, trying to disobey the rules or trying to take advantage of people. Frankly, there are a lot of individuals who don't want to be employees. They want to be independent contractors. They prefer that. They'd rather be 1099 than W-2'd. They'd rather have more flexibility and less control, because the rules for employees are very cumbersome and very difficult for employers to adhere to. So sometimes it can actually be cost and difficulty prohibitive, in the sense that you won't hire the student because you have to make them an employee, and that ends up harming the student and the business. So the law, again, kind of pushes people away from engaging in that relationship, which is bad for both people. But the problem is that most of the time when people come to me, they're saying, well, how can I make this work as an independent contractor? And the example that I use is, imagine me as a lawyer. I am the truest form of an independent contractor, because you can't do what I do. You need somebody licensed and professional to do it. I have my own business. It's separate and apart from what you're doing in your business, but you need someone to draft a contract for you. I am truly an independent contractor. Whereas if you were hiring me to be your personal assistant, I don't know that I would be, because I'm working for you, under you, and doing your work for you, as opposed to being completely independent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that totally. And that kind of goes into legal structure, legal entities and stuff. So if, as you mentioned earlier, if the independent contractor is solely independent, has their own entity, are they required then to have a legal structure, have it set up as a business?
So under AB5, under some of these business to business relationships, so let's say they don't fall under one of the exemptions. So AB5 breaks it out in a few ways. You're either subject to AB5 and you should be an employee, or you fall under one of the exemptions, and then there's certain rules for those exemptions. So if you're an architect and you fall under that exemption under AB5, you still have to meet the Borello test, which is like an 11-part test that shows all of these different rules. So even if you're an architect, that doesn't mean automatically you're exempt. It means you're exempt as long as you also meet this sub-test under AB5. Now, one of the exemptions under AB5 is business to business. If you're not exempt under one of the professional services categories, but you still want to be exempt because you're running your own business, you fall under a potential business to business relationship. Now, that business to business relationship has a 12-part test.
Oh my God.
One of those tests, one of those parts of the 12 parts is that you are legally formed in your own right as a business. So that would require you to have a structured entity, whether it's an LLC or a corporation. Sole proprietorships would not, in my opinion, fall under that classification. So you would actually have to be legally formed. So that would be LLC or corporation or partnership or something like that. So you would have to have an actual entity. And another one of the 12 steps or 12 parts is you have to have a formal written contract that states that you are an independent contractor. So in business to business transactions, yes, if you're like, let's say you're working from home and you're a bookkeeper and you're doing bookkeeping for a variety of people, and some of that work includes, accounts payables or some more administrative work, not just bookkeeping, that kind of falls under a personal assistant type category, maybe sorting mail, things like that. As long as you're an independent business, you are a registered business, you have multiple clients, you have a formal contract in place, you would qualify hypothetically as a separate business to business transaction, not subject to AB5, or at least exempt from it. So that's where, yes, having a legal structure may also be required as an architecture firm. If you're trying to work for, let's say, a general contractor that's building a big planned division or whatnot, wants to hire you to come in and help with one piece of the design. So you're a subcontractor or maybe of a bigger architecture firm. You would want to have legal structure to meet that business to business transaction, so that you don't become independently, as a sole proprietor, a potential employee of that firm or of that contractor. So the legal structure is beneficial both for the hiring party, so you as an architecture firm, and also for the contractor who's trying to operate as a business themselves. So again, that's where that business to business exemption falls under. And structure is really I would say it depends on what you're doing. Architecture firms can fall under a professional corporation in California, in other states as professional LLCs. But it really depends. I believe that if you're a licensed architect and you want to open a formal entity, I would recommend, as I do as a lawyer, a professional corporation.
Mm-hmm.
That way, all of your contracts, all of the work that you're doing falls under that entity, as opposed to setting up maybe a consulting firm or an LLC and having yourself be independent from the company as an architect, but then running all of your business through that separate entity. It's just more work for the same result. So I would say, as an architect, if you're licensed, you'll want to register it as a professional corporation. But if you're not an architect or you're just a business doing transactions with other businesses and you're, a drafter or something like that isn't licensed, you could set up an LLC or a corporation to do those business transactions.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, I did want to talk about that too, because not how I was raised, but how I started off business, I always heard starting off as a sole proprietor in the beginning is easy. So it's like definitely the way to start off, because you don't have to, it's not that expensive. You basically file the paperwork online in 2 seconds. It's, pretty basic. So would you still recommend people who are just start off in that way? Or is it better to start off in a bigger structure? If that makes sense.
So from a legal standpoint, I'm going to answer this question in a few parts. From a legal standpoint, it's always best to start out with that protection in the formal entity structure. Practically, it may not be advisable from a business standpoint to spend a bunch of money forming an entity that you may or may not have any contracts yet that will fall under it. So I don't want to say that being a sole proprietor is a bad idea. It's a way that a lot of people get started. Frankly, I did that I built my law firm. I started as a sole proprietor. Now, my decision was not because of cost, because I formed my own company. It was more because I started practicing law in the middle of a year, and I didn't want to form an entity halfway through the year and pay the $800 minimum franchise tax board payment for 6 months. So I just started my firm in June and then had it ready to be my entity to be formed on January 1st of the following year. The reason that I did that also was because, and this isn't tax advice, this is just a tax reality that I faced, you pay a higher tax on your income as a sole proprietor than you do if you were treated as an S corporation. So you're going to pay a self-employment tax, which is going to be about 15%, which is more than you would pay as a pass-through entity. So there's a tax liability issue. There's also the just general business advice that I would give, which is people who operate as a sole proprietor sometimes don't engage themselves fully in separating everything they do. So they'll be a sole proprietor, and the bank account that they put their birthday money goes in, all of their business income goes in the same account. So it's one of those things where if you're going to start a business, irrespective of whether you're a sole proprietor, an LLC, or a corporation, you want to establish yourself in your mindset as this is a business. It's separate from me. And so its money is not my money. Its liabilities are not my liabilities. Its credit cards, its bank accounts, all of those things are separate and apart from me. That's the best way to set up your company anyways, whatever you decide to do structure-wise, just because you want to remember that your business is separate and apart from you. Hopefully, as you grow it, you'll eventually either be able to pass it down to somebody else, sell it, bring on partners, bring on investors, whatever it is that you want to do. If you look at it as a sole proprietor, it's just you. So it lives with you, it dies with you. If it's a separate entity, it exists separate and apart from you. It's going to be managed better. It's going to be easier to manage, frankly. And then it'll also alleviates a lot of the liabilities that you have. So even as a licensed architect or as a licensed attorney, we have professional insurance, professional liability insurance. That covers us as individuals. But my rent, my employees, my all of my other liabilities, contractual liabilities with vendors, my cell phone bill, my credit card bills, all of those bills, if they're just me as a sole proprietor, they all land on me. If it's as an entity, I get that layer of protection where I can protect my personal assets from my business liabilities. So there's a completely different component, which is the legal protection, which is why I think forming an entity is so important. Because as we're talking about AB5, every relationship that you have, if you do a misclassification issue as a sole proprietor, you're going to be personally liable for a lot of that liability. Now, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of, there is also personal liability for owners of companies who don't pay people wages. That is true, irrespective of whether you're an entity or not. But there are some liabilities that will be covered as a professional entity, as a formal entity, as opposed to an independent sole proprietor. So as a lawyer, I say incorporate all the way. If you're doing it strategically as a sole proprietor just to buy time or to save some money, that's fine, but be mindful that there is risk in that. And eventually your goal should be to incorporate.
Yeah. And I like it how you mentioned the bank accounts too, because sometimes as a sole proprietor, it's like people ask you, oh, how's business? And you're like, I don't even know. I don't even know. I mean, like, I kind of know, but it's not as like, if you had its own account and you were actually getting a paycheck, which is kind of nice anyways, because then like I'm getting paid when I'm getting paid, rather than like, oh, the business is doing whatever it's doing. I think that in itself just relieves anxiety, even because it's like, sure, like everything is set up properly.
Absolutely. And this comes more from my business consulting and coaching mindset, which is more about, when you have a business, you need to have a budget for your business. And your budget as a new business is really just looking at your bank account and seeing what's coming in and what's going out. That's the first way to identify what you're making and what you're spending your money on. And if, like you had just suggested, if your business money is mixed in with your personal money and your personal expenses, then it's hard to say whether that expense is a business expense or not, and how to build a budget for your business. You may be personally spending a bunch of money because the holidays are coming up, and so your bank account looks really unhealthy, but your business is actually really healthy because you're not spending money on your business, but it doesn't look that way. Mm-hmm. And so I always say, separate it so that you can see the health of your business, because it'll also help you with pricing. If you're trying to figure out what to charge your customers, but you don't know what your business costs to run because it's mixed in with everything else, then you could be cutting a big portion of your revenue off by pricing yourself too low, because you think it's the right price, but it's really not, because when you look at your expenses, you're barely breaking even. Mm-hmm. And so again, not necessarily a legal philosophy, but more of a business strategy, that you really want to know, what does it cost to run this business and how much money am I making? And you should also take into account indirect costs like formations, like hiring a lawyer, right? Because if you're sitting there going, well, my rent is this, I have contractors, or I have employees, or I have this and all of that, and then you don't factor in, well, I pay, $5,000 a year in legal services, I pay $2,000 a year in accounting services, and you don't add those back into your global costs to estimate your pricing, then you're going to end up at the end of the year not making money, because you're like, oh, I forgot to factor in that formation cost. I forgot to factor in my contract negotiation costs. I forgot to factor in my bookkeeper. So having it separate and keeping it separate, because if it's, again, as a sole proprietor, your accountant is doing your personal finances and your business finances and bills you one bill. So how do you know, okay, that's how much it costs for the business? So that's why, again, whether you're a sole prop or not, I believe that sole proprietorships are really a transitional phase, as opposed to a decision of, I'm going to be a sole prop. Mm-hmm. But there are people out there, I have clients that have been sole props for 20 years and, never been sued, never had an issue. Frankly, I think that if you're running a business, you're eventually going to have an issue, and it's better to be legally protected. But don't just set up a company on LegalZoom and then think you're good and then ignore it, because you have to maintain that entity as well. So there is a completely different component, which is, once you form the entity, maintaining the entity. And one of the main factors of that is not commingling personal funds and business funds, because that is one of the things that can destroy the protection of your legal entity. Is if you mix and match your personal money with your business money, that would be a factor to what they call piercing the corporate veil in the law. And showing that even though you formed the LLC or the corporation, you didn't manage it correctly, and therefore you don't get that protection.
So, that's perfect. Goes into, especially from a younger business owner point of view, the idea of hiring a lawyer is very intimidating. Like, just the idea of it sounds like, well, first of all, I don't know where to start. Second of all, that sounds very expensive, which from an architect, people always think architects are so expensive, where in the long run, we're much cheaper than you not hiring us, which I know is the same for lawyers. So So what is that like? Like, what's the first step for people? What does that look like for people? When should they hire? I know I'm giving you 1,000 questions, but kind of
No,
it
that's
all.
fine. I it's a tough question to answer in the sense of everybody's situation is different. Everybody's personality is different. I have found in, the last 5.5 years that I've been doing this, that I really play a variety of roles for my clients. I have the unique background and experience that allows me to be more than just a lawyer for a lot of people. But what I know that primarily a true just lawyer is going to be for you is going to be both a legal advisor, a business advisor, and sometimes even a personal advisor, because the law is both a strategic, from a business standpoint, decision, a legal strategic decision. So getting the education on what the law is and why the law should work or for you or against you. And then there's an emotional component, because when something wrong or bad happens, you want somebody that you can trust and rely on personally. So there is a little bit of that counseling aspect of it. They call lawyers counselors, and once you start practicing, you really understand why. Because it is nuanced, it's tricky, it's difficult, it's expensive. And again, going into what you were saying, like, we're a lot cheaper preventing things than we are fixing them. And so what I would say is that if you're starting a business or you have a business, whether you like it or not, you're going to eventually need a lawyer. So it's better to start looking for one now. So when to start looking for a lawyer, I would say if you don't have one, right now is the best time to start looking. How to do that? I did on my law firm's Instagram, I did like what I call them, highlights, and it talks about how to hire a lawyer, and it goes through very briefly steps about what to do, how to look for them, and how to go through that process. I mean, for me, it's like anything. You should start with Google if that's the best way to do it. Find at least 4 people that you feel like what they do and how they work, and maybe the content that they're putting out online kind of vibes, that their vibe works with what you're looking for, and then set up interviews. I think that there's an intimidation factor. I kind of pegged myself in the beginning as not your parents' lawyer, and the reason that I did that was because everyone I know that's an entrepreneur that I grew up with just went to their parents and said, "Hey, do you know a lawyer that can help me?" I did it.
Mm-hmm.
I did it
Mm-hmm.
myself. And I
I
ended
did
up paying way too much.
too.
Yeah, I ended up paying way too much for what I got. Not the lawyer's fault. They were just, my dad had an established business. He had really good lawyers that were really expensive, and I didn't need that for where I was in my business. So I ended up paying a premium for great legal work, but I didn't need their skill set and their price point for what I was looking to do, which was just form an entity. And so I always say I'm not your parents' lawyer, in the sense that don't just go to your parents for their lawyer. Their lawyer, although they may be great lawyers, there's 2 aspects of it. They're probably going to be more expensive than the lawyer that you need. And second, their loyalty, although they will have a contractual and legal loyalty to you, their loyalty is to your parent or to the person who referred you to them when it comes to that level. So it's like, oh, let's help Nico's kid with this issue, as opposed to, hey, you found me on your own, you hired me, you created that relationship, I'm not doing your dad or your mom a favor. And so it becomes this situation where you want to go out and hire this person, they're your lawyer, they sold you. And that's the other side of this, is that I think that intimidation component of, they know the law, they are going to not manipulate me, but they're going to tell me that I really need them when maybe I don't. And the reality of the situation is, as a lawyer, I am as much a salesman as you are as an architect.
Mm-hmm.
I have to go out and prove that I'm worthy of you hiring me. I have to prove that I'm knowledgeable of what I know and what you need. And I also have to make sure that you like me and that you want to work with me. So if you're going to your parents' lawyer or somebody else's lawyer, there's almost this, I don't know, like a default, like, oh, well, they're going to hire me because it's Bob's daughter or Jim's son. Like, they're going to hire me because they came referred by their parents. So there's not really a sales component. It's more like, yeah, Nico, what do you need? I can help you.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you were to call my office, I'm going to set aside time to do an intake call or meeting. Right now it's Zoom because of the pandemic, but I'm going to do a meeting. I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to understand your business, and I'm going to work with you. And I'm going to pitch you on why I'm the right person for you. So when hiring a lawyer, look for 3 or 4 people that are going to do that for you, and get a feel for it up front. How did the intake process feel? Were they responsive? Did it take them too long? How am I feeling about their energy or their vibe? Do they work with other people like me? And do they have experience there? Some people prefer the suit and tie. I personally used to be the suit and tie lawyer, but I changed that because I enjoy working with people who are more like me, as opposed to trying to meet the needs of people who I don't really get a good vibe with. So I turn people away often because they don't fit the mold of the clients that I'm looking for. They should be feeling the exact same way. I'm sure people who have reached out to me didn't hire me because I didn't fit the mold of what they were looking for, which is great, because I don't want to work with people who don't want to work with me. And
100%.
you, as the client, shouldn't work with a lawyer you don't want to work with.
Mm-hmm.
So, if I could pull back the curtain, I would say that lawyers are just like any other business person, trying to get clients and trying to meet the needs of their clients. So, there's no magic happening behind the scenes. It's just technical, as is architecture, as is any licensed trade. It's just a technical thing that you're going to need somebody who works in that field to help you with it. So ignoring that, hopefully every lawyer that you meet with is going to be ethical and good at what they do. Pick the person you want to work with, and give yourself the options. I feel like that's one of the things that I see the least of, is people aren't interviewing enough options.
Mm-hmm.
I have people who call me. I'm the first lawyer they call, and they hire me right on the spot. And I always say to them, go get a second opinion or go talk to somebody else, because I don't want you to doubt that I was the right hire for you 6 months or a year from now.
Mm-hmm.
And also to make sure that they're not just looking for someone to solve an immediate problem and then not really going to engage me with the intent of having a good relationship over time.
Yeah, I 100% agree with having the right clients who you meld with, because I've talked about that a lot too, that especially when I was younger, first starting out, I felt like I had to fit this mold in order to be respected and taken seriously, especially in, an authoritative figure like an architect. And now, as I'm being more confident and, sure of what I do and stuff, I'm more and more myself. And I find that actually is attracting the clients I really want. So, and I don't get every client, but like you're saying, like, it's in the end a lot better, because frankly, I probably don't want to work with you if we don't meld, because then it's not symbiotic. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no,
yeah, you know what I mean.
No, absolutely. And when I started this out, like I said, I started out as the new age lawyer and not your parents' lawyer. And I was having there was this kind of like dichotomy of ideas of like, a part of me really wants to be this new version of what a lawyer can be for young entrepreneurs. And now that we're in the kind of age of entrepreneurship that we're in our country and in the world, frankly, where everybody's doing something unique, whether it's a side hustle or a new business or whatever it might be. But then I was having this part of me that was like, growing up when I was working for my dad after being a pro surfer. I mean, I'm covered in tattoos, I have long hair, and we would go to conferences and I was his director of operations, and he would tell me, like, we went to Vegas in May and he was like, sorry, you have to wear long sleeves if you're going to go out to the pool. You can't expose that because I don't want people to get the wrong impression. And I'll be honest, back then, before tattoos were as commonplace as they are now, I could tell the difference between somebody who met me without seeing my tattoos and somebody who met me with them.
Mm-hmm.
And just the way it was, like, the difference between someone saying, whoa, you have tattoos, and treating me differently, to then someone who I'd already established a relationship being like, whoa, you have tattoos? That's so cool.
Mm-hmm.
Which is a totally different experience.
Yeah.
And so in the beginning, I struggled with that too. Like, I wore a suit and tie every day the first 3 years of practice. And then I realized I'm attracting the wrong clients.
Mm-hmm.
I want to work with the people that I want to work with. So I started to feel more comfortable wearing a t-shirt to meetings. I always respect the professionalism. It's not to say that I'm not, the professional efficacy that I bring isn't there just because of the way that I look. But at the same time, I like to be myself and work with people like me. And that's where I think if you're approaching hiring a lawyer, don't be intimidated by the image that lawyers put out, but also reflect on what's the lawyer you want to work with. Do you want, the high rise, like the TV show Suits lawyer? Are you willing to work with somebody who's maybe more interested in, being like me, more casual approach, but bringing the same level of efficacy to the work that they do, but they maybe approach the relationship differently? Neither one is better. It's just what suits you. And that's the way that you should really look into hiring a lawyer, or anybody, frankly, for that matter.
Well, I feel like it makes things more inclusive too. I feel like as our generation is starting to be in these professional positions and taking over these corporations, we are seeing more people in higher positions with tattoos, or, you know, with nose rings, or in positions that they may have been looked down upon. But also our clients are now starting to be the younger generation that also looks like us, or, you know, so I think having people in these professional positions makes these younger, maybe entrepreneurs who are 22, feel more comfortable hiring a lawyer, or feel more comfortable hiring architects. So I think that's great. Okay, so when you're not working or lawyering, what do you like to do?
I still try to surf when I can. Definitely not in any professional or competitive capacity. But other than that, I have a daughter. My wife and I just had our daughter about a year ago. So I am usually spending time with her, which is, I would prefer to do that more than I get to. And my wife and I just, you know, it's just been an amazing experience to raise a daughter. So that's where my focus usually is. Otherwise, I'm doing stuff like this, talking about business, reading about business. I'm really big on professional growth and stuff like that. So I focus on, you know, reading a lot, and then getting out in San Diego whenever I can, whether it's to the beach or hiking or whatnot. Very outdoorsy. So that's another part that I try to bring into my firm as well. I have clients that surf, and I try to go out and surf or play golf or do stuff with them. So you know, I'm, as an entrepreneur, and I'm sure you know, there's not a lot that I do that isn't somehow associated or related to my work.
Yeah.
But other than that, I'm always just, I'm lucky that I'm passionate about what I do. So it doesn't feel like work.
Yeah.
But work is a pretty big part of what I do.
For sure. Well, thank you so much. I know this is going to be super valuable to everybody listening. So where can people find you? Where can we support you? Instagram or social media or anywhere?
Yeah. So my Instagram for legal stuff is The New Age Lawyer. You can find, I put videos up there all the time talking about different stuff. TheNewAgeLawyer.com is also, it's a sub-site of my firm's website that you can look at that I post videos on. My law firm is just nbecerra.com. And you can see all the stuff that I do and kind of a bio about me and the areas that I work in. But yeah, I mean, that's pretty much where to find me. You can reach out to me, email me, call me. I love talking about business, and I love helping people. So, you know, I am in that vein of the not your parents' lawyer. If you call me and we chat, I'm not going to send you a huge bill. I'm very transparent about that. So, you know, I love talking about business, and I love helping people. And if you want to reach out, please do.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, thank you. I really appreciate you carving out this time.
Yeah,
And
thanks for having me. It's been
yeah.
really fun, and I know it can be a little boring and scary stuff, but it's fun for me to talk about.
Well, I think, you know, law and architecture can both be boring, and I like talking about it. And I figure people who are interested will be here, you know, so it's fine.
Yeah. Well,
Awesome,
thanks again.
Nico.